All right, good afternoon, class. Welcome back. I wanted to make a couple, well, I guess several minutes of comments to try to round out what we started in class today. And our purpose today was to spend a little time with the Qin Empire, which, despite its very short reign, is one of the most important empires within China's illustrious history of empires. What they were able to do in this brief 15-year period was truly remarkable. And so I spent some time prefacing my comments a little bit today. We're talking about globalizing empires and the Roman and Han dynasties. We talked about some developments that had been happening in the world prior to the emergence of the warring states and Qin dynasty eras. And I left off today talking about the implementation of new and stronger governmental practices. We know that legalism, among other things, was quite powerful for the early Qin rulers because it placed quite a bit of power in the hands of government. Government was very active and activist. And I left off talking about how legalists believed very much in merit. They were, I'm not going to say colorblind, but they were class blind. They didn't really care who your parents were or how much money or land your family had. They wanted to know what you could do for the Qin governmental system. And as a soldier, that meant how many people can you kill in battle. As a farmer, that meant how many crops can you grow and realize for the benefit of Qin society. And based on your ability to provide and accomplish things, you were given opportunities within Qin-era government and society. Now you can imagine, in some ways that sounds like a really refreshing way to do things, right? I mean, meritocracy, giving people opportunities based on their skills and their abilities, what's not to like? And really, in many ways, this was an important breakthrough. But what's worth noting here is that this really upset, in a fairly dramatic way, the character of Chinese society prior to the Qin era. So there were people who were angry, who were frustrated, offended, appalled even. And so it would take some time, but in time, those frustrated people would be ready to launch a counteroffensive, or at least a backlash, which was part of what happened toward the end of the Qin era. So social tensions began to fester rather quickly here. We met Qin Shi Huangdi, the famous ruler, and really the only important ruler of the Qin era. His son will enter into power after Qin Shi dies, but the empire will be all but over after the death of its most powerful leader. Here I put this picture in place to show you a little bit about wall construction and also the gear of the soldiers. This earth, this wall was the tamped earth method, and so you can see on the side some wooden scaffolding, and then you see the peasants who are essentially forcing a lot of earth and a little bit of lime into a trough to sort of create a thick wall. That said, much of the walls that were being developed during the Qin era consisted of just essentially earthworks being pushed together and formed into large berms. And we can even see evidence. Parts of the wall today look almost similar to how they did back then, and they look just like glorified dirt mounds. But much of the wall, much of the Great Wall of China has, as I mentioned, undergone more recent revision during the Ming era. But one of the things that Qin Shi and the Qin leadership did was they required very much public works projects. And so the government was really skilled in its ability to generate revenue in the form of taxes to its land reform policy. It was very skilled in generating labor by having a requirement of both labor and military service that it required from young men throughout the Qin era. And these public works took on a number of different expressions. There was the wall building that took place. There were tremendous amounts of roads, about 4,000 miles of roads, which really rivals the Roman Empire at the same time. And you'll also notice, if you do even a slight bit of research online and you look up the tomb of the Terracotta soldiers, you'll understand that this tomb, this elaborate public works project, was a way of glorifying the great Qin Emperor Qin Shi Huangdi. And we have not yet fully unearthed it. We have unearthed thousands upon thousands of soldiers, but we think there might be at least as many or more that have not yet been dug up. And also under the major mound of the tomb of the Terracotta soldiers, there is a tomb proper for Qin Shi, and it was undertaken with elaborate design, and there are even booby traps and hazards for those who choose to go in and explore it. It'll be interesting to see what the Chinese government decides to do with this absolutely fascinating set of historical artifacts. Okay, and so in an interesting way, pardon me, there's something going on during the lead up to the Qin Empire, and that is that everyday peasants are being incorporated into the function of the government and the society in a way that they hadn't in the centuries prior. In some ways this is good. Like, for example, the military becomes democratized, it becomes open to everyone. And when the military is open to everyone, everyone tends to have a greater stake in society, and when everyone has a greater stake in society, people tend to be more involved and more valued, more significant. But it's also worth noting that the way in which the military forces were used sometimes led people to think that they were expendable. Similarly, the labors on public works projects. In fact, the Great Wall has had various nicknames through time, and in some ways it's called the Wall of Sorrows and so on and so forth. And the idea was that when peasants died laboring on the wall, oftentimes their bodies were thrown in with the mix of material toward building the wall. Now, the degree to which that's true, but we know it was true in at least some cases, and it suggests that we shouldn't get too excited about the involvement of everyday people in Qin-era China. So it's worth noting that the Qin Empire does not form overnight. It begins in that backwater region of the Qin that I showed you on the map this morning. But over time, as the Qin province consolidates its control and does these new innovative things with its government and its demands upon the people and its tax reform and its land reform, the Qin province is developing for itself the tools, the capability, the strength, and the power to really dramatically transform China as it had been known. And in the process, that Qin, that small province, is going to increasingly take on a larger portion of East Asia until it really takes over almost all of northern China in a very impressive way. So legalism was important in the sense that it was, again, I said, not colorblind but class-blind. The idea was that laws would apply to everyone equally. There would be no privilege. The sole basis upon which you would be evaluated is upon how contributing of a citizen you are to the Qin Empire. And so this was harsh in many respects, but it was quite equal. The bureaucracy was the system of government that was quite effective. And let me see if I can find that. Yeah, okay. First, we'll talk about standardization. So the other major contribution that the Qin Empire makes, and by 221, so after 100 years of building and taking over, using their agricultural surplus to grow their military, and using their agricultural surplus to equip their military, their soldiers, with the best infantry weapons such as crossbows and shields and armor and so on and so forth. The Qin recipe, the Qin formula for success, proves to be quite astonishing. And they are going to take over. But because they also have this powerful governmental machine, they're going to use the power of government to standardize much of the world that they take over. So last week we talked about how the Hellenistic Greeks, when they took over, they imparted Greek culture and brought it into greater contact with the East, the lands of former Persia. Well, in the case of the Qin, there's a similar thing going on, only the Qin are going to forcefully require the provinces of China that they overtake to adopt a standard or uniform set of practices. And in many ways, these turn out to be really useful to the Qin Empire growing and consolidating its control. So for example, they come up with consistent weights and measures, meaning if you have a unit of measurement, say an inch, of course that's not what they had, but if you have an inch in the Qin province, that's going to be the same inch as the same way you measure an inch in the Qi province and in the Zhou province, so on and so forth. So in a short period of time, weights and measures become uniform across the growing Qin domain. Writing, the script that they use, the language that's used, starts to become unified. I have here cart axles, so the same width of cart axles, so the ruts that are put in the road in one corner of China, in one province, are going to be the same as the ruts that are put in the road in another corner of the Chinese Empire. And so there starts to become a cohesiveness which is very important, and of course government can benefit from that too. Now I also want to make a quick plug for bureaucracy. What really makes all of this possible, the legalist Qin governmental strategy and practices, is that there is a system whereby decisions are made in a very impartial, objective, formal manner. If you think about that, that's what a bureaucracy is. A government bureaucracy is designed to make decisions that can't be fudged or influenced by people's relationships and their friendships and perhaps a bribe or a favor done here or there so that someone can get a shortcut or get on the inside track. The Qin government was incredibly methodical. It was immune to any corruption, immune to any insider buying, and that really angered the aristocrats because they had for centuries gotten by on their relationships and their status, their standing, their honor, their privilege. That was largely done away with. Again, source of resentment. But let's focus on that. Bureaucracy, not necessarily an across-the-board bad thing. It gets a bad rap today, but a bureaucracy is something that we can thank for, say, our laws being applied somewhat uniformly across all people. And I think that's ultimately a good thing. So we should be careful before we just cynically say that bureaucracies are per se bad. Because, believe it or not, I think we all benefit from bureaucracy. I know I hate it when I see someone get treated with special insider status because of who they are or who they know. I'd prefer it to be an impartial system. Okay? And then lastly, the Qin rulers are going to divide their now growing empire into a number of different sub-levels of government. In that previous bullet, talked about how government had at least 3 important departments: staffing, military, and then revenue, the money coming into the government. And let me just mention that staff department was almost entirely about rooting out corruption to make sure that people were treating all members of Qin-Era society similarly. But the commanderies were important district-level government positions. So the Qin broke their large empire into different provinces, and each province had a governor, and the governor would have both a state political role, and the military commanders would have a military role to carry out. Okay? And with that, I'm going to stop. Oh yeah, let me just mention, I think I already have, one of the standardizations were the coins. and you can see these nice square coins they helped